here. I did mention to her, I remember her as an apprentice back in 2008. And then she was off for a little bit and then came back. Kelsey was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, but she is not Chris Brady, Ohio State graduate. Okay? She went to a liberal arts school in that area. So don't hold that against her here. She has way too many parts to explain. If you look on her resume, I love how these actors list them all. But one of the most interesting ones this year, she has played it a couple of times, traditionally male parts. So this summer she played Horatio, who's sort of Hamlet's aide de camp this summer. And I think he kind of enjoys playing those male parts there. But also, if you read her resume, she puts down special skills, and she has combat skills, hand-to-hand and broadsword. And if you happen to see the indoor touchstone performance of the Moors, you don't want to mess with her, okay? If you know the ending of that show there at all. And I was kidding some people walking in, if we didn't have the Zoomers, we could have just, such a beautiful day. She's used to working outside without a mic. We could have just had our meeting outside there in that courtyard and let her go from there. But we have Zoomers and being nice to them, but she doesn't even need a mic. So no further ado, Kelsey Brennan.
Oh, thank you.
What is it in acting? What is that spot they put down?
Your mark. Your mark. Exactly. Well, where should I stand? Where's my mark? I don't know anything about it. Okay, great. I'll keep my notes over here. Hi, thank you so much. What a warm welcome. I'm just so delighted that so many of you know of APT, have been to APT. Rob kind of stole my thunder because I do like to ask the same question. How many people have been there? But who remembers what they saw? Yes, what'd you see? Romeo and Juliet. Yes, the height of romance. Beautiful. Yeah. I have a Romeo and Juliet ghost story. I'll tell you another time. But yeah, another time. Who else remembers what they saw? Yeah.
Raisin in the Sun.
Raisin in the Sun, just this year. Wonderful.
Taming of the Shrew.
Taming of the Shrew, inside or outside?
Outside.
Outside. Well, yeah.
The one with Mrs. Mallow from.
Oh.
Birthday.
Monday. Yes,
Monday.
you saw the Moors. Fantastic. Mrs. Malcroft, the rival. Rival. Well, so some of you have been there this summer, yeah.
I think my most memorable one was a few years ago when you did an adaptation of Sara on the Bergeron.
Oh, yeah. I was in that one.
And the actor who played Cyrano was, I thought, beyond outstanding. It was
Jim Ridge.
one of those jaw-dropping performances. You know, the whole final scene as he's dying.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievably powerful.
My panache. The closing night performance of that show rained out. So I remember halfway through the show, we just all came on stage and bowed and just, you know, because that's really sad to not be able to give it its due at the end of it. But I'm glad you like that one. Well, I'm just curious. I just like to know what people have seen and what they remember when they go out there. Because of course we do 9 plays every year and we've been kicking around for quite a long time. Okay, so why am I up here? I'm a core company actor at APT. I'm a professional actor. I've also been trained as a executive coach and educator, but I spend all of my time at APT. I'm also one of those people that really likes what I do for a living, and I'm realizing how rare that is. So anytime I get to talk to people about what I do, it's really a day well spent. So thank you so much, Rob, for inviting me to come here today and just gab about what I love, which is American Players Theater. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on what we do, how we do it, and then talk specifically about what my experience has been and what it's led me to as an actor. So for those of you who don't know APT, please come see us. There's fans in this audience today, so you can ask them why they love it so much. But we are a professional theater located in Spring Green, as we've mentioned. We perform classical texts. So as you've heard, these are some of the dense poetic pieces of art that exist in the American and European theater. So you've got Shakespeare, Shaw, Oscar Wilde, Lorraine Hansberry, Arthur Miller. You know, a lot of the stuff that people read in high school and found really boring. That's what we do at APT. But I challenge anyone to come and still feel that it's boring when it's in front of you, when it's a lived experience, and when you're consuming it with people who are dedicating their lives to storytelling. Because Romeo and Juliet was not made for you to sit and read it. It was so you could experience it in that beautiful thunderstorm, in that moment that will never be again, in that one particular live experience. We have 2 theaters where we perform. Yes, one of them is outside, the Up the Hill or the Hill Theater. That's an 1,100 seat amphitheater under the stars in the elements. It's a natural amphitheater, and natural in that we don't have any amplification up there on the hill. We are not wearing microphones. So yes, we perform all based on our own natural voice and text skills and training. So a little side note, APT was founded in 1977 by 3 artists who came out and they were looking for a place to do uncut Shakespeare. So 4 or 5 hour versions of Shakespeare. We don't quite do that now. We're a little more, we make some cuts here and there just to make it a better experience. But they wanted to do uncut Shakespeare outside. And the story goes that they looked at about 40 different sites across America and finally settled on a 110-acre farm in Spring Green, Wisconsin, because it had this bowl at the top of the hill. And that bowl provided a natural amphitheater that was also acoustically very sound, fun, but acoustically very efficient, right? So part of what we do as actors at APT, we're learning our scripts, we're memorizing our lines, we're figuring out the moments, but we're also taking voice and text training all the time to make sure that when you get out there to see a play, you not only understand what's going on, but you actually hear it. The only time that we use microphones is when we're trying to manipulate the sound of an actor's voice. So the ghost in Hamlet, if we want some reverb on that voice, or if someone's singing with lots of instrumentation behind that, we'll go ahead and employ a microphone. But typically, we take a lot of pride in the fact that we're relying on the actor's instrument, and that's really rare. That's something that sets APT apart from a lot of theaters and other outdoor theaters as well. We also have a 200-seat indoor theater, the Touchstone. This is a theater we built in 2008. And what's great about this is it's also allowed us to perform and program some of those plays that maybe wouldn't make sense to be outside in such a large space as our hill, but also allow us to show our audience things that we think are going to become classical plays, but maybe were written in the last 10, 20, 30 years and wouldn't typically be programmed as classics, but we would still like to share those with our audiences. And also as artists, we want to try some of that more contemporary experimental theater and see what you think. So the Moors is absolutely, that's not typical for APT. That's kind of a experimental play, but I think there's a lot of people that thought, I want to see that with APT actors. I want to see what that's like in the space. We perform 9 plays a season from June to November in rotating rep. Rotating rep, what's that mean? So rotating rep means when I show up in May to start rehearsing as an actor, I get 3 scripts in my hand, maybe 4. And I'm going to rehearse and perform all 3 of those plays at the same time. So if you came for a week, you really went for it, you went for a week in August, you could see 8 plays. And then you'd have to come back in November for our fall show. What it means for me is on any given weekend at APT, later into the summer, I could do Hamlet at night on Thursday. And then I do Sense and Sensibility on Friday night. And then Saturday, I might do Hamlet in the afternoon and Sense and Sensibility at night. And then I might end Sunday with a performance of Cyrano. And then Monday, I sleep all day. Well, probably, kind of. But typically what we're doing is always something, it's one of those 3 plays at any given moment, at any given performance. And to me, that kind of is the best because it feels like the Olympics of theater. It really feels sometimes like you're an endurance artist, athlete, because you're being asked to kind of switch over. On those days where I did Hamlet and then the Moors, I'm going from outside to inside. I'm going from Shakespeare to Jen Silverman. I'm going from Horatio to this weird Huldy character that no one's ever seen before. And that takes a little bit of mental shift for certain. but that's why we like to do it. We welcome around 100,000 people to APT every season. I've always thought that was an unbelievable number and inspiring to me. But what I think is even more inspiring now is, as you can imagine, like any organization that's based on gathering a lot of people in the same space for a collective experience, the pandemic wasn't a great time for us, right? So we had to shift. Even though we have an outdoor space, we still have had to shift with all the different things that come with it. One of the most beautiful things this year is that we still welcomed 95,000 people back this year, the first year that we were performing at capacity in repertory. And that is unheard of in the American theater. It's not happening. So we have audience members that are loyal and have been loyal for 30 years, and it's astounding. It's not only inspirational to me to look out and see 1,100 people after a pandemic, but we have a budget that's a little bit over $7 million. 75% of that budget is met through ticket sales. Also, unheard of. That's not normal. That's one of the things that sets APT apart, is that where we put our resources is on the stage. And we have to have people come and see those plays to ensure that we are solvent and we continue to move into the future. And so far, so good. We have about 270 employees at the height of our season. 45 of those are actors. And 13 of those actors are part of this core company that I'm a part of. You can think of it as a corps de ballet or a resident company. And this is where I'll go off the details for a little bit and speak to you more from a personal experience. The core company is, again, another detail about APT that makes us really special. As an actor, being part of a resident company is something that was much more popular many, many years ago, 50, 60 years ago. It's not something that really exists very much anymore. And I don't know why, because to me, it's undoubtedly made me the best actor I can possibly be for a few different reasons. But when you have a core company, what you're doing for the audience is you're allowing the audience to make connections with people that they've seen throughout the years. We were just talking about how you saw Sara start as an ingenue, and now you're seeing her play much different roles because it's been 25 years. So as audience members, you kind of get to know this team of players that you like to watch do different things. And you also can trust that when you go to a show you've never seen before, you know Jimmy DeVito is going to give you a good experience. You know you can rely on Tracy Arnold to give her all, because these are people who have committed their lives to being specifically at APT. And I think that's really special, and what allows for us to create some loyalty among our patrons. And I'm really proud of that. As an actor, being part of a core company, this is my theme today, unheard of. It's just not something that's common. I count myself incredibly lucky. And I want to give you an understanding of why. So before I was part of the core company, I was a regional theater actor. I don't live in Hollywood and I don't live in New York. I want to tell plays and I want to tell stories in the Midwest, because that's where I'm from. So a typical year for me as an actor, I lived in Chicago. But my best year, I would do a play in Chicago for 6 to 8 weeks. That's a typical contract for an actor. Then I go to Indiana. Then I'd go to Milwaukee. Then I go to Minneapolis. And then I'd probably spend a month on unemployment. That's a great year. And if I made $35,000, woo, that's a great year for an actor, truly. So we're not doing this to get rich or famous. We're doing this because we love the work and we love what we're able to provide for our audiences. You can imagine having a transient lifestyle like that. It's really hard to plan financially. It's really hard to plan where you actually pay rent, because you don't know where you're going to be. And to book a single job, you have to find the play, who's producing what play. Am I right for it? Meaning, do I have the skill set? Am I the right age? Am I physically presenting in a way that makes sense for the role? Then you have to secure the audition in competition with millions of other people trying to do the same thing. And then if you beat out 200 people, maybe you can get that role. And then depending on the theater's operating budget, they tell you how much money you're going to get. That's it. And you do that as much as you possibly can. So when APT says, Kelsey, we want you to make a career-long commitment to this place, that does exceptional work with actors you've grown up watching. You can imagine, I kind of couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was life-changing for me. So being in this core has allowed me to have a home artistically and personally, to know that I'm going to be in a place as beautiful as Wisconsin, in Spring Green, Wisconsin, for 5 to 6 months out of the year, and has allowed me to get to know people in my company so intimately that the theater that we're making together, we can risk at a higher level, we can trust at a higher level, and ultimately we can do plays together that are better for our audience because we have such a beautiful working relationship together. So if I'm doing something on stage that is vulnerable, intimate, violent, whatever it is, when I'm doing it across from other core company members, there's a certain amount of trust that's already in the room. We're not starting at a 0, we're starting at a 10, because I've gone to their wedding and I've babysat their kids and I've gone to their father's funeral and I've gotten lunch with them in Spring Green. You know what I mean? We've created this family of people. And believe me, it's as complicated as it sounds, but it's also great for making stories together. And that's just something that is part of the fabric of being at APT that you can't find in other places. The other thing that being at APT has provided for me is the opportunity to ask myself as an actor, what do I want to do next? So yeah, I get to play these exceptional roles with people that I deeply connect with for an audience that is way more generous than we deserve. But what else do I want to do with my time as an actor? So a few years ago, I started asking myself that question. How do I fill out the rest of my time if I know I want to make the centerpiece of my life APT? And it was right around this time that we got a phone call from Gunderson Health, a huge hospital in La Crosse, huge organization. And they wanted to hire an actor. They wanted to hire an actor to come in and have improvised conversations with their employees at a leadership level to be kind of the culminating event of a leadership initiative that they had been rolling out for the past 2 years. So I would go in and I would meet the person in front of me, pretend that I was their employee, and allow them to have an improvised conversation with me in their current position, in their role. They were then taped and assessed on their leadership skills, on their empathy, on their delegation, on all sorts of things that they were looking for. And I have been super lucky to play really meaty roles in my life, really challenging roles. This was harder and more rewarding than any of them because I wasn't working with actors. I was working with people who were terrified of me. I was working with people who knew that they were on camera and just couldn't understand like what they needed to get through in order to show what they needed to show. But it was beautiful because they always did, because we were operating in this space of playfulness and imagination. I'm not your employee, we're just pretending. So that really got me thinking, truly. And I had some time because there was a pandemic. But it got me thinking, how else can I take this philosophy of theater and my skill set as an actor and provide it to different industries that have learning outcomes, that have goals that they're trying to meet in terms of communication and personalization and leadership and authenticity and empathy and all the things that we need to connect to one another, no matter what we're doing. So lucky me, super lucky me, core company actor at APT. I'm also now the director of our professional development programs. This is a new thing that we're rolling out. We have been for 2 years. And what I've done with my boss and cohort, Sara Young, is create a series of workshops where that's exactly what we do. We take the greatest hits of theater making and we say, what do you do for a living? Well, here's how we can give you a few new tools in your toolkit to maybe let you lift off even a little bit more. And I focus on 2 areas, team building and presentation skills, obviously, right? In team building, this is all the stuff we do in the rehearsal room. This is deep collaboration. This is radical acceptance of someone else's need, thought, belief. So it's really easy to have a collaborative conversation when you all agree. Oh, that's fun. We're just throwing ideas around. We're gonna make a campaign. We're gonna create a play, whatever it is. When you disagree, when it's a difficult conversation, when there's different personalities in the room, how do you create collaboration? The core of that for me is this concept of yes and. If you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, or any type of improv comedy, this is what is actually happening at a cellular level. And what yes and is it's an improv and theater tool that asks you to not only listen to what the person across from you is saying, but to accept what they're saying, to accept the truth of what they're saying, regardless of your feeling about it, your opinion, how much you disagree, how much it just can't happen, to accept what they're saying and then contribute back to the conversation. So that's how we build deep collaboration based on theater philosophy. Public speaking, God, people are afraid of public speaking, and I get it. I really do. I just have more practice at being in front of audiences. That's really what it comes down to. But when I teach public speaking, I approach it the exact same way as I do when I'm building a character. And that starts with investing in what you're saying and not worrying so much about what it's going to look like. So that starts with some really easy questions. Easy for me because they're part of what I do, but they might be new to people who aren't used to talking to people. Questions like, who's my audience? Where do they come from? What do they believe? What do they need? And what do I want to change in them? How do I want them to feel when I'm done talking? If you answer those questions, then you get to get really specific about how. So as actors, when we have a moment on stage, we say, what am I doing in this moment? What's my motivation here? Right? That's the kind of typical thing you think of when you think of actors. But really what that is what am I doing? Am I inspiring? Am I challenging? Am I hurting? Am I flirting? What is the action? And if you connect to that action, you will never forget the words. That's the secret to being an actor and memorizing. It's not about the words so much, it's about the intention behind it. And if you apply that to public speaking, and you can do that, you can repeat that process over and over again, you can then kind of naturally and authentically create a speech in where your voice is varied, in which your hands do things based on what you're talking about. And what you're doing is actually creating a character. So that's where we focus our attention when we're talking about public speaking. All of these things that I'm talking about when I'm talking about workshops are based not only in what we do at APT, but how we do it at APT. We believe in culture and ethics in a human-based organization. And hopefully when I teach workshops, that's something that's very clear as well. So I have information about the workshops over on the table there, I believe you with. But hopefully I've left you feeling like you got to go see a play. That was my intention today. So, yeah. Great, let's do questions. And please, Sarah's gonna, okay, please, yes.
You talk about collaboration. So
Yeah.
How crazy, I'm just picturing Jimmy DeVita and the group getting together for a family.
Yeah.
What is it like to be in a room as you're starting to put it all together? Is he the alpha male making the decisions? Or
No.
where do you guys come together? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Jimmy DeVita is part of the core company. He was also the director of Hamlet. There is no alpha in a rehearsal room. Certainly the director's job is to be the person on the outside who's watching it happen and saying, this has to move here. This doesn't feel like we want it to feel. I can't hear you, or whatever it is. But the actors are crafting a story together. And what makes that so complicated and beautiful is that there are so many different personalities, histories, perspectives that come into a room to do a Shakespeare play, and all of it has to be on the table. All of it has to be part of the storytelling, or else we're denying people's participation in the process. So Jimmy's a facilitator in that moment, and ultimately a decision maker, but there's not so much a power dynamic as there is a true community of people coming together to build a play. That's a rare thing, I think. Yes, please.
Because you do so many different parts in a short period of time, have you found that paraphrasing what they were going to say about what they were going to do is better than word for word according to the script?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Sometimes in Shakespeare, absolutely. Because in Shakespeare, what we're doing as actors I like to think of, when I'm doing Shakespeare text, it's not how I would talk, right? It's poetry. And I have to lift myself to the level of that poetry as opposed to bring it down to me in the way that I normally talk. A good way to do that is to paraphrase. What am I saying in that poetry so I can really understand it, and then I can communicate that to you. So certainly I use paraphrasing all the time when preparing for role, but when I'm on stage, you better believe I'm gonna say the right words. I'm gonna say it exactly as it was written. Yes,
Are the core company is involved in the process of choosing the plays for an upcoming season?
no,
Really?
not, no, right? No, the real answer is no. But the way that they are involved is that the core company is the primary casting focus. So our core company is made up of these 13 people. And so we're going to choose plays that highlight these 13 people. I will say that part of our organization encourages open door policy, encourages people to express what they want to work on. And I've certainly floated plays to artistic and said, I really want to play this role. And then 4 years later, it happens. And that's super exciting, or it doesn't. There's so much to consider when you're trying to cast 45 actors in repertory, that of course there's lists and lists and lists of plays that are no-brainers. But putting that season together is a puzzle that is far beyond my pay grade. I mean, you can ask Sara about that.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do, casting is just the first part of it, and we have to figure out if y'all buy enough tickets.
Right.
And, or do the plays cost more than we can spend on them, or do we have the right amount of people to build the sets? For instance, we had a play that we're gonna do next year that we had to pull out of the season because we didn't think we had the backstage.
Right, right. Yes, please.
I was amazed at the number of people, 200 and something, I think that you said were,
275.
are most of these full-time, part-time, do they live in Spring Green? Are they commuters? Where do they spend, like yourself, the rest of the year? What's the makeup of a personnel?
Not a huge full-time staff.
Right, about 33 on full-time year round.
They do live in Spring Green, but we have a housing crisis in Spring Green. We're housing, how many people did we house this year? 165 in a town of,
1,500.
yeah. And so we currently just built a large new apartment complex that was funded by a supporter of the theater. And during the pandemic, it got even more complicated to house people in homestays and to house them together. And if this person got COVID, could they live with this person? So I have an apartment that APT provides for me yearly that I live in. I spend the rest of my winter doing a little bit of that transient work, that traveling, as well as my teaching. But the vast majority of people are coming in from Chicago, New York, Minneapolis, Milwaukee. They're coming in, they're staying with us for 5 to 6 months in the best housing we can hope to provide. And it gets so tricky as we try to expand. Yeah.
Is my impression correct that the company, not just the core company, but all the actors is bigger now than it was a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
COVID?
Yeah.
It just seemed like there were a lot of kind of young actors who had maybe been there a season or two, or not, or this is the, so it just seemed like you had, when I scanned through the program, you had a lot of people.
Yeah. We're expanding, and we're expanding to diversify and include as well. We're expanding to bring the next group of people who are going to be in the core company to the forefront, right? Because I don't want to say anything bad about my colleagues, but they're, 50, 60, right? So there's got to be, we have to kind of bring an influx of new people and give them the opportunity to grow and to test out whether this is actually what they want to do, because it's such a specialized part of acting, doing that dense poetic text. So we're actively trying to bring more and more people in and give them the space, the stage, and to tell different stories so we can bring more people in. Yeah,
2 questions.
great.
You can do either one first.
I'll do both.
What kind of training do you have? I know that you have you done any August Wilson play?
At ABT?
Yeah.
Oh, I was like, I definitely have not. But yes, we have done August Wilson. We just did fences, and we also did, but no, we just did fences. We're thinking about doing what's the other one? Ma Rainey.
What was first one?
Fences
Fences.
by
Oh,
August
yeah,
Wilson.
yeah, that was good.
Yeah. Trying to think of the other one, a beautiful playwright. If you don't know August Wilson, stunning African-American playwright. My training, I got my undergrad degree from Ohio University, not Ohio State, but I went to Ohio University in Athens. I have a bachelor's in theater. I never got my grad degree, which is kind of rare, but I spent my time at APT. That was my grad degree. I mean, I got to witness people across from me and go, how do they do that? And then figure out a little bit of how they do that. That's all the training I've had. Yeah.
I'm wondering if, you mentioned in the introduction that you had played a role in that was yeah. I was wondering if you would comment about kind of as an insider about what your experience or what you see is the social change potential, I guess, of APT in the theater. Mainly to break down stereotypes. For example, going to see him in Madison versus Chicago, I had to constantly readjust myself to the Asian appearing male who played a part that I came to expect as an African American, or the concept of music of Aretha Franklin singing and playing for his tenor. You know, the change of perception of things. I wondered what your perspective is on the inside.
Yeah.
Having done that.
We should get coffee for 3 hours. Beautiful question. Thank you. I will answer it from my own experience being asked to play a traditional male role. I got cast in that traditional male role because I was the best person to play that role. And I'm not like, I'm the best person to play that role. I got the person who was playing Hamlet happens to be one of my best friends in the world. So Jimmy, who was directing that, thought, who's the person to play Nate's best friend? Well, let's ask Kelsey to do it. And that created a relationship on stage that was so grounded in reality that I believe it was really strong. I never really thought, I didn't play it as a man. I played it as me. I played it as me named Horatio with a little bit of difference because it's not Kelsey. But I never felt the pressure to make it anything different. Because I think what we do when we cast against tradition is we invite different stories to be told. We invite the audience to look at that different choice and say, how do I feel about that? What does that mean about me? Where do I go with that information, right? It is a bit of a challenge sometimes to go against what is expected as the experience in Hamilton. But hopefully you recognize that that is the beauty of theater, and that is a gift that we as audience members, myself included as an audience member, we get to go and we get to challenge what our expectations are. It's funny, I think there were some people who, I'll tell you this story. Someone came up to me, an actor actually, and said, I've seen a lot of Hamlet. I've never heard Horatio cry at the end. And was recognizing that as maybe a deeply female experience. And I said, you wouldn't cry if your best friend died? Don't think so. You know what I mean? So it challenges what we think of, but I think it also reminds us that we're all connected by our deeply human nature. So more coffee if you have. I hope that was a little bit of that. Yes.
But you cast people, persons of color in sort of English, drawing room dramas and stuff,
Absolutely.
And if going to theater is suspending disbelief in some ways, pretending that these people are who they are, they are who they are acting to be.
Right.
And so, there's a Black man who's, who's supposed to be an kind of part of the English gentry, and you forget it after a while.
Right.
But it's interesting, some of the comments, I don't know if you followed any of it, on some of Amazon Prime's production of some of the Fulton mythology, that they're casting persons of color in that way, and some people find that just outrageous. And I just, what? We're talking about elves? I know, but the black actor playing the, playing
The
the.
death of a salesman was an African American.
Yes,
So I just,
yes, in New York right now.
people aren't very reflective about some of the things they say are. Because you're always pretending to be somebody you're not.
Absolutely. I think you have two options. I think you show the world as it is, or you show the world as you wish it was. And those are two really valuable stories, right? So in Hamlet, we have a black Polonius who's killed by a white man on stage. That is a really vulnerable, violent, triggering experience for people to watch, given our current socio-political climate. And we do it on purpose. It's not to hurt anyone. It's to ask us to have the conversation about what that means. And as actors, there are long conversations in the rehearsal room, making sure that the people who are playing those roles, who know that it wasn't written for them, are safe and feel comfortable going in front of an audience that is mainly white, who are having these questions with good intention or not, right? So you can show the world as it is, or you can show the world as you wish it to be, which is full of anybody, right? And both are valuable. Yes.
I remember leaving Hamlet this summer and thinking I've seen Hamlet a number of times. And I thought that was the best performance of Hamlet I've ever seen. And I
Thank you.
heard other people saying it was really tremendous.
Yeah.
But my wife and I have been going since the late 70s.
Really?
Early, yeah. I mean, porta potties and big long lines. And I don't remember buses in those days. And frankly, I really got tired of Shakespeare. So there was a period in the 80s after James DeVita took off that, or Randall Duck Kim got,
Yeah.
I got tired of seeing him in everything.
Sure.
After a while, it was,
Sure.
he was Randall Duck Kim playing Randall Duck Kim.
Yeah.
But I think that over the years that APG has gotten better with more people, more variety and stuff. When they started adding things non-Shakespeare, for me, that was great, more comedy.
Ah.
But to the Moors, I have a couple questions.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. This is getting real specific.
When we left that play, I read the thing in APT's program, and I
Yeah.
thought, I want to see this. And then my wife, we go out, drive out there, she'll read something off the internet.
Huh?
And it sounded like it was sort of interesting, but if I had known that before I went there, I had no idea what Moors was about.
Yeah.
But when we left, we said, every one of the actors, actresses in that play did a superb job.
Oh, thank you.
And you,
I'm a mess up there.
Blended.
Yeah, no, it's
now,
a lot.
did you invent that, or did someone else invent that?
No, I invented that. I say it with, I'm a little ashamed. Like it's
Oh, that
very
was-
funny. It
That
was
was
a lot of fun.
hilarious.
Thank
To
you.
tell the people what the.
Out of context, because this is not funny at all. Yeah, no.
Oh, it was just hilarious.
I played a character who, well, how I related to that character was someone who kind of lived in an imaginative world, because the reality of their world was too painful to bear. And so I had these journal entries, and I would start them all with the it's not funny out of context. I know it's not. I would start them all with the day, and I'd go Monday, and then I would say, and then I go Tuesday, and I would start, and I'd say my journal entry. So had to be there, and you can't because it's closed. But that was so much fun, and I'm glad you trusted us enough to come see
In
me one.
the end, when you're being really melodramatic,
Yes.
do you play that role that same way every performance? Or would it be based on how the audience was reacting to you?
You mean the song?
When you're jumping all over the stage, you're singing and
Yeah. I played it. The bones of it were the same, but it did vary based on how willing the audience was to laugh at something so dark. Yeah. Yes.
One Zoom comment,
Yes.
Gray said that he got to work with Jim DeVita back when they did the Laramie project, and he's a prince of a guy, a real pleasure to work with, and he treated the crew and tech really well, and that he's so thrilled to hear that you're at capacity.
Oh, wow. Where did you do the Laramie project?
I'm done.
It was actually in Madison.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I did the projection design for it. And yeah, I can't remember what group he was doing it with, but that's a devastating play.
Oh,
And they treated it really well. So
that's wonderful. I love that play. It is a
Tracy, I don't know
devastating
if
play.
that's what I can-
Well, she talks about that play a lot, actually, doing Laramie Project. Madison Rep is no more. Yeah, that's a bummer. Let's
There's
restart it.
only 2 minutes left, but just mention, I know it's not your expertise,
Uh-huh.
but the educational program. is
Yes.
phenomenal.
Absolutely. Sarah, why don't you talk about education?
Yeah, absolutely. So, our education program, which the Greases, support, are wonderful supporters of, basically has, sort of 3 different parts. First is our student matinee series. And, pre-pandemic, we welcomed, about 10,000, up to 10,000 students.
Yeah, let's trade off.
You don't have to go.
Tag team.
Yeah, so we would, have about 10,000 students come to school day, performances of APT plays. The same performances that, that you would see in the evening, students would come and see during the day. And then, as part of that, series, we send teaching artists out to, do workshops in cooperation with those performances that they're seeing at APT, and offer resources, study guides, talk back, et cetera. So that's the one leg of the school. A second one is our residency project. David Daniel, who's one of the core acting company members at APT, is also our education director. And the off season, he is on the road in classrooms. In fact, he's in classrooms today, the day after we close. And he mainly presents a program that he designed called Potency of Poetry. And Potency of Poetry is a wonderful week-long in-classroom residency that sort of, in short, helps students and teachers to discover the power of words and poetry. And he goes through a series of exercises. It's really highly rated. He's been doing it for, I don't know, 10, 15 years now. And teachers just keep it in high demand in schools. The third program we're so excited about, and this was designed by David and a couple other teaching artists during the pandemic, and it's called The Words Between Us. And The Words Between Us is based on literature, a piece of literature by an author of color. And what it does is it helps students and teachers to increase their racial fluency, increase their ability to have conversations about these subjects. It is not critical race theory. It has nothing to do with critical race theory. It is about literature. And, but they do these wonderful exercises together based on a book that the teacher chooses. And they really sort of learn how to share these ideas. This sort of came as a request from a school district in our area, a rural school district, where there had been some racial incidents, and the teachers were like, we don't know how to talk about this. We don't know how to deal with this. We're so scared of this. Can you help? ABT, can you help? You do education programming. You seem to know how to do this. So we started to figure it out. What do we have? What can we do that would be helpful in the classroom in this area? And they sort of came at this from this literature standpoint. And so they have 4 different books that the teacher can choose from and work with the students. And that's it's a program that's just getting started. It piloted last fall and then sort of launched in the spring. We're booked for this fall, starting to get booked for the spring. I feel like once it gets out there that people are really gonna take off. It's a really special program. So those are kind of the three parts. I think I took more than 15 minutes. I apologize. So, thank you.
So thank you to Sara, right? And Kelsey. Thank you very much for being here today in your presentation. We make a contribution for all our speakers to Rotary International's End Polio Plus funds. We will do that in your honor as well. Next week, Craig Culver will be here to share the Culver's story. Wow. So We can, Kroner Burgers would be really, interesting. Yeah, at least they got a few weeks to, if you don't have to just jump in line for and get sold out. So, thank you for being present in person and on Zoom, and have, remember, service above self, and have a great week, everybody.